So the two esteemed presenters we have today are on the right side of your screen. There is Dr. Elisa Jane Binnenstock. She's a college research professor at the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions at Arizona State University. She received her doctorate from University of California, Los Angeles in sociology in the area of mathematical sociology. Her substantive area of specialization within sociology is social psychology, with emphasis on emergent properties of her substantive area of specialization within sociology is social psychology, with emphasis on emergent properties of exchange. Her focus is applying formal models such as social networks in game theory to understand the relationships among elements of human interaction, such as power, status, inequality, conflict, cooperation, coalition formation, reciprocity, and reputation. In addition to serving as faculty at Georgetown University between 2005 and 2014, the University of California, Irvine between 2001 and 2003, Stanford University between 1996 and 2001, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill 1994, 1996. It's really a pleasure to have Dr. Elisa with us. On the left side of the screen, there is Dr. Edith Gummer. She's currently serving as the Executive Director of the Office of Data Strategy at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. In that capacity, she provides direction and support for the use of the data collected about the college for both administrative requirements for accountability and compliance reporting, and supervises the use of data for research focused on educator preparation. Dr. Gummer's career has spanned engagement in educator development at both the university level and in positions in funding agencies, including philanthropic organizations at the federal level as a program director at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Gummer spent a number of years as a program director in the Regional Educational Laboratory Network at both Education Northwest and with West Ed. Dr. Gummer has a doctoral degree from Purdue University in both education and basic science master's degrees from the State University of New York at Albany. Dr. Binnenstock and Dr. Gummer, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. Dr. Binnenstock, can you get us started?
Of course I can. Thank you very much. Greetings, everybody. Hello. It's nice to meet everyone. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce this group to social network analysis, called SNA for short, a formal method for studying groups and organizations. HEP-M will be using SNA to get a better understanding of the on-the-ground communication patterns of this group of professionals who train primary school teachers. In this presentation, we'll introduce some concepts and ideas from SNA and reveal our plan to study this group, explaining how this study plan is designed to improve the training of primary school teachers. You could advance, there it is, to the next slide. Okay. I'll start with a background on the origins of SNA. So social science theory and research typically focuses on individual people or on groups, organizations, institutions, nations. SNA is a way to formally observe and communicate how individuals make up groups. The focus is about how people are connected to each other through their activities and organizations. There are many types of relations or relationships that people have: familial, mentoring, marital, business ties, anything you can imagine. For this group, we will be interested in who communicates or collaborates with whom. SNA can model any reason for a tie between two people. In addition, it reveals patterns of connectivity between two people. Revealing actual ties among people helps us identify communication and collaboration gaps to inform how to fill them. Advance to the next slide. Okay. The vision for the development of a preparation of primary school teachers is well established, but knowing who is actually making this happen on the ground in real time is important for moving the vision to strategy and then to reality. The ENS and CRMEF faculty are doing great things, but initial meetings with faculty from both institutions suggest that the need for more coordination is high. It is recognized that distributed expertise is crucial. The more we know about the current capacity and collaboration efforts, the better we can provide support to support and enhance this capacity. Promoting coherence among the various actors in primary teacher preparation is complex, and ensuring the information and capacity is shared broadly, nationally, will improve success. Social network analysis is a methodology that emerged as anthropologists, sociologists, and psychologists innovated while studying a broad range of formal and informal groups and organizations. Independent researchers trying to wrap their minds around their own research issues independently discovered ways to represent relationships between the people in the groups that they were studying. Some represented these pictorially as graphs. Others used matrices with rows and columns of the names of people indicating connections with ones or zeros. Both of these representations were amenable to mathematical analysis. What was interesting and surprising is that these analyses revealed that graph mathematical properties correlated with sociologically interesting concepts. In other words, once the data is collected and organized in this way, the analysis can reveal important social or organizationally relevant information. Here, I focus on a graph representation of people in a social group. Actors are represented as points or nodes. Relations connect people and are represented by lines or edges. Sometimes arrows are used to represent directionality. Mentoring, supervisorial roles, or helping relations are intuitively directional. Arrows distinguish who is the mentor versus the mentored, for instance. Friendship is usually mutual, so arrows are not needed. Two connected nodes.
Give me 1 second, Elisa, please. I need to reshare the presentation.
Sorry.
So we were in slide
we were in slide 6, yeah.
We're in slide 6.
Okay. So
go ahead.
Yeah, so slide 6. So actually, if you can go back 2 steps more, I can do the dyads and triads again. So,
perfect. So 2 steps more. So the triads, the dyads and triads are right here on the presentation.
Yeah. Can you go back?
Do you want me to go back or go forward?
No, we'll just leave it like this. The 2 connected nodes are called a dyad. 3 nodes are considered a triad. Triads are characterized by the number and type of relations that connect the 3 individuals. The example on the side represents a triad where all nodes are connected to each other, but often only 2 people are connected or one person can be connected to two who are also not connected to each other. Okay, now go on to the next one. Slide 7. Yikes. Okay. Of course, networks that are really interesting are more complex and contain more than 3 people. Below is an example. The data for this network was collected at what's known as AnthroCamp, a summer program to train people in social science methods, anthropology methods. The researchers asked all participants to rank order their own connections to all other participants. The graph you see is everybody's top 3 choices. These are the people they reported they hung around with the most. Note that this graph can be decomposed into dyads and triads. Using SNA, it's also possible to distinguish larger cohesive subgroups, clusters, and cliques. Okay, now you can move 8. Thank you. A network that is connected is called a component. Sometimes groups do not form a component. Network analysis, the mathematics is done on components. But if a group is made up of multiple components, it indicates gaps in communication. The group is not cohesive and connected. SNA can identify vulnerabilities in networks that cause these breaks in communication lines. SNA can also be used to identify structural properties that distinguish among people or nodes. Once the data is collected, mathematical analysis of the graph can reveal interesting facts about who in the group is important to the information flow. A lot of connections are called degree centrality. This is associated with popularity and sometimes power and status. Between a centrality can identify bottlenecks or bridges, people who control or stop communication, or link together otherwise unconnected parts of the organization. The density of ties throughout the graph, or in some parts, can indicate cohesion. To illustrate this, consider the camp network. Although everyone selected 3 people, some people were selected by more than 3. Degree centrality reveals who is popular. You can hit the slide. Pam is popular. Between a centrality indicates who holds the network together. If we remove just 4 edges, the single component devolves into 3 separate unconnected components. John in green is a high betweenness node. His removal makes communication between the blue-colored and gray clusters very unlikely. Whoa. Most of the time when we think of organizations, we think of them as organizational charts. These show the hierarchy with regard to status and communication theoretically, but do not reveal real communication patterns. This is a hypothetical organizational representation of the organizational structures. It looks more like a network, but it's still only theoretical. It does not reveal how difficult it could be for some elements of the structure to communicate with others. Similarly, for the CRMF, again, next slide, we emphasize that these are only hypothetical networks, not those that will result from an SNA study that we are going to conduct. To really find out what's going on requires collecting data on who actually works with or talks to whom. The Social Network Analysis Survey does not stand alone. To understand an organization, researchers rely on traditional information about people and organizations to give meaning to the structural findings. The node in the analyses are associated with attributes, location, gender, status, role, expertise, in order to reveal social patterns, not just mathematical patterns, detectable by the analysis. Are there gaps in the network due to regional divides? Do professionals from some fields tend to communicate more broadly with others? We do not know what we will find, but by running the analysis, we can discover if there is a pattern to what types of people are communicated with and communicate with each other, and which types are not. Some of these findings may not matter. Almost always, there are analyses that reveal to the organization members' areas where leadership and membership thought that communication was occurring, but that it was actually not occurring. For this study, we begin with an enumeration of the people who were expected to be part of the network. The next step is to ask these people to respond to a questionnaire on Qualtrics about who they speak with about work. These data will be merged with information about the respondents and then analyzed. We want to find out at the network level how well connected the network is. How many components is it made up of? Are some people isolated? How many people are isolated? Are there many pendants, portions of the network where one person is connected to many others, but is there only link to the network? How dense is the network? At the individual level, we will identify those nodes that are well connected and have high betweenness. We will also be able to discover how people select with whom they communicate. Are there homophily effects where people prefer to work with others who are like them? On what variables? Do scientists prefer to talk to one another? Do women prefer to talk to one another? SNA is not perfect. Data collection only reveals some of what is going on. Even so, we have found that even the most basic questions to a part of the network reveals important information. Often, SNA is done in multiple stages so that researchers can learn from the group how to best discover the most important information about the group. In that spirit, we are asking for people to do the best they can in completing the form. Perfection is not required. SNA expects people to forget some information. The method accepts this. The assumption is that most people remember most of the important ties that they have, and that provides an excellent beginning. Even with only that imperfect information, the method can reveal a great deal. What we anticipate is that we will find some areas of expertise may show considerable distribution within and across the organization. Other areas of expertise may be concentrated in only a few organizations. We expect to find that there are informal subgroups in some places that may unify the network. And we also expect to find a lack of connectivity in some areas of the network may make communication less efficient. And we can identify where these areas are. Our objective is to characterize distributive expertise within and across institutions to develop the distributive expertise. We'd like to identify pathways and edges in which information can best flow across the institution involved in primary teacher preparation to share emerging best practices. And we'd also like to identify people with key roles whose participation in developing primary teacher preparations are integral to the success of the program and ensure that they are connected to each other. Next slide. We anticipate that this analysis will help us identify gaps in the roles or responsibilities that exist regionally or within organizations or within the whole organization that can improve the research and development work to be done to support and improve the primary teacher preparation modules, and support for training needs can be tailored and supportive of all organizations. We hope that this presentation helped you understand why we are asking you to do your best in working through our questionnaire. Your responses will be merged with those of everyone else's to create a single network that describes reported communication related to primary teacher education. Your response matters because they reflect all the dyads that you recall. Absent these, the network will be less complete. The more complete the network, the more accurate our recommendations will be. These analyses can help make everyone's job easier and more efficient by smoothing out the communication flows for improved efficiency and accuracy. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I'll let Mohammed pick up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elisa. Thank you very much, Edith. This is really a very, very rich presentation. But as you know, with super rich presentations that address at times new concepts, new terminology, it might be a little bit maybe difficult to process in the beginning. This is why we want to open the floor to address at least 5 questions, with the understanding, as I promised, that we're going to also be looking very carefully at the remaining questions and making sure we share them with you and Edith, and so that we can provide the answers to our colleagues from the universities and CRMFs and DRFs and all the other networks that we're dealing with. Now, the main takeaway, in just I'm reminding my colleagues here that the purpose of the presentation today is really to introduce this study to as large of a group as possible. Why? Because as we established in our various meetings with you all, is that objective number 3, which is the promotion of coordination, coherence between the various spaces, namely the universities, the CRMFs, and the schools, is a critical condition for improving teacher preparation, like in the 3 spaces that we all agree that they happen in. So this is why this study is of critical importance, because it establishes the landscape of what these connections look like. And this is one of very important requirement for really building something that is sustainable, that does not end with the end of the project. So without further ado, I'm going to be looking at some of the questions and go ahead and maybe share them with the panel. Just reminding you again that the copies of both presentations are going to be shared with you all once we have your emails, and reminding you, please, as you listen to our 2 esteemed colleagues, reminding you to, if you think of any other actor who has an influence on pre-service teacher preparation, please make sure you share their name, email, be it a specific individual or an organization that you think should be invited into this study. So I'm looking at the chat box right now, and so far I'm seeing most of the questions are greetings or more technical questions. I'm going to give it maybe 2 or 3 minutes for the colleagues to share, if they have any questions, to share them with us over the chat box. So one of the questions I'm seeing here on the chat box, Elisa and Edith, is my question is about the adopted approaches in studying the network. What is the relationship of structuralism as adopted in anthropology with your analysis? That's question one. Question two, how can group dynamics be useful in studying relationships in groupings?
Wow, that's a whole lecture. I can approach that. So the structuralism and functionalism from sociology were both motivators for the type of research that prompted the development of social network analysis initially. The anthropologists that started using SNA or invented SNA were in the field, and instead of just reporting on their perceptions of ties, what they were trying to do is record data on patterns of ties. And so they would write down who talked to whom. They would record their observations of engagements and relationships of different types among people, including kinship and marriage ties, exchange relationships, all types of things. And when they got back out from the field, they scribbled these things down, and they started creating these pictorial representations of the data that they found. And they saw that the best way to communicate and make sense of them, to wrap their heads around them, is to make these graphs. And then they realized that between different types, or between different data sets, between different communities and groups that were emergent around the world, there were certain patterns of ties that they saw a lot, and other patterns that never existed. And there were certain that were associated with functional, happy societies, and others that were more associated with dysfunctional societies. And so other researchers decided that they would try to codify and use mathematics to formalize the relationship between these social outcomes and these mathematical patterns that could be discovered through collecting data and then representing the data in either what I mentioned before, the matrix, or the graph.
Elisa?
Yes.
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sounds really good. Now, there is another question that asks about whether the study is limited to communication via social media remotely without the rest of the paper means of communication. Could you provide some clarification about this?
Repeat that one more time, please.
So the question is the following: is the study limited to communication via social media remotely without the rest of the paper means of communication?
So the study is going to be on the web, but we are not interested in social media necessarily. We're interested in who talks to whom, any way they talk to them.
Excellent. And this is a good point, Elisa, because at times I think there is a bit of the social network analysis falls victim of the frequency of the use of social media a lot. And when you translate both into Arabic, it seems like you're talking about social media, but that's not social media. Just as you just said, it's really interest in being able to document who talks to whom.
Oh, let's really emphasize that. Social media analysis is not social network analysis. I mean,
Excellent.
you use social network analysis to study social media also, but social network analysis is trying to find real, genuine, hardcore relationships. And I will tell you that the old anthropologists, that collected this in the 1940s were not even imagining something like social media. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yes, times have changed. Now, one other question from my colleague. Can you? Hello?
Hello, I lost you for a second.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, now I can again.
Okay. I'm just going to read to you an excerpt of of the question of the entire one. So the colleague says that one of the isolated and missing interferers in the Moroccan context is the supervisors or some slash inspectors.
Mhm.
Do you think we should start by studying the role of universities in CRMFs in pre-service training, or should we start by the desired profile of the student we want?
Elisa,
And
why
let,
don't you Eliza, why don't you
Yeah.
let me take that? I think that we need to understand that the social network analysis study is only one aspect of the HEP-M project.
Mhm.
The major work that we will be unfolding this year will be the development of modules for primary teacher preparation, and those will be based on standards for learning for Morocco's primary students. And I think that the SNA is being done to help us understand the people who are working on the project and the people with whom they are interacting, so that we can coordinate the message about these modules, their development and their implementation.
Good point, Edith. And even maybe I could even use our study here, like promoting it even further, because for us it's super critical to the entire project. Is when the colleague asks if we should start first by determining or identifying what the desired profile of the student, what is that desired profile of the student that we want. The study goes to something at the heart of getting us to outcomes, which is coordination and communication. And really the challenge that is reported by our colleagues from CRMFs in the universities is that there isn't enough coordination. And we believe that with better coordination, all of us, we believe that with better coordination, better communication, more effective communities, we will be able to tackle some of the issues that you just raised, which is maybe including the desired profile of the student we want. So the social network analysis really is at the heart of the systems understanding of what it is that is needed to make sure that we have the needed parts to fall in place in terms of coordination and communication that allow us to do work that is conducive to higher quality education.
Can I jump in
Go
here?
ahead, Elisa.
One aspect of our study and our questionnaire is prompts to recommend people to include. We've been at, we want the more inclusive, the better. Now that doesn't mean that everybody who somebody thinks is a member of the network really is, but it's better to err on the side of inclusion, and then you could see where people really fit in. So, so in some ways, even though our team has collected an initial enumeration of people who we think should be included, we know that that's not a comprehensive list. And we are prompting everybody to include people they talk to about this topic so that we're able to expand the network as much as possible.
Wonderful. And this is also another question about the expected benefit of the social network analysis. So the colleague says, we thank you for this important topic that we really need. In fact, the problem of coordination between the three institutions is seriously raised. We need a framework as a regulatory and legal reference that regulates the relationship between these institutions. By these institutions, the colleague means that all the institutions that are responsible for providing pre-service teacher education, which is the universities and CRMFs. So the question, again, just to remind you of the question. So she said, we need a framework as a regulatory and legal reference that regulates the relationship between the institutions. Is this possible?
Well, the social network analysis is a step toward seeing what elements are really necessary for regulation, what is endogenously or emergent there, what connections emerge anyway. But the question of regulation is beyond the scope of the network analysis, but the network analysis should help frame where there really are needs for regulation, because those are the types of ties that aren't being naturally formed, and so they might need to be incentivized
Okay,
in some regulatory way.
wonderful. So there is another faculty who is interested in understanding the mathematical reasoning and the algorithm in the analysis of the interactivity between the different institutions. He's asking you if it's possible at some point to see that analysis.
Oh, definitely. When we're finished with the analysis, we're going to make it available so that people, in some sense, we're going to interpret it, but in some sense, bringing an analysis like this back to the group is the best way to get the most rich insights into what's actually going on, and also the reasons for why it might be going on. It's always in the debriefing of the analysis that I do to an organization. When I'm within the organization, that organizational leaders and members of the organization actually provide the richness to the analysis and provide the best inputs, because they, again, can look at the mathematical models and patterns, but they know what drives them intuitively because it's their life.
And I can't agree more, Elisa, because at the end of the day, we're conducting this study to help move the needle, to help effect some change in terms of promoting coordination. And certainly, I think the more involved our colleagues are in the co-interpretation of the data, I think the more likely we're going to have recommendations that are implementable, make sense, and they have the buy-in of the various partners, the stakeholders at the CRMFs in the universities.
I want to say one more thing to that question. When we bring the network, when I brought in the past a network analysis to an organization, two things happen. One, there's always surprising findings that the people within the organization didn't know. That's always true. I've never been in a situation where they knew everything. There was always something like, oh, I didn't know that. But there was always the opposite too, where when you show them something that they sort of knew in the back of their brain, but you show it to them explicitly in the data, they go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's from there that they usually get their ideas for how to really make improvements.
Wonderful. Good. There is a question from a colleague. I'm going to read the question, but I'm not sure I understand it really clearly. I might have to, so the question in Arabic, so that the colleague who posed it knows that I'm addressing his question in particular. هل يمكن مطابقة الشبكات الاجتماعية مع خطوات النقل الديداكتيكي؟ So the translation is it possible to superimpose or to overlay the social networks on the steps of didactic transfer? I'm not sure I know what this process is. I will ask the colleague to just send me send us more information about the steps of didactic transfer, and then we could answer him in a more informed way. There is a question about to what extent could the method of social network analysis contribute to promoting communication at the school level?
Well, if that were the case, then we'd have to also include some teachers. And it could be, a sampling of teachers to find out what that is. In other words, the boundary of this study, I don't think extends into various schools throughout the country. That could be a follow-up, but I don't think it was intended, at least broadly now. But social network analysis can be done on any group that has defined boundaries. So once the people who are, you know, supporting the study or sponsoring the study decide who they want to study, we find those people and we ask them questions and we try to be as inclusive as possible. My guess is that this will extend into schools to some degree, but that the main focus is on primary teacher educators and not the primary teachers themselves.
Yep, yep. There is another question related to the mathematics of the analysis.
Okay.
And the question is the following. Does the mathematical model measure the affinity that exists between the members of the network?
It won't measure affinity directly, right? Because we're not asking a question. If affinity is an affect, it's a feeling. But what we can look for is cohesion. So the more redundant or overlapping ties, the tighter a network, the more cross-cutting ties there are, and that would be measured in measures called like density. Those types of measures, a lot of cross-cuts, a lot of overlaps, a lot of common ties among different people indicate cohesion and solidarity. Whereas if things are very loose and spread out and people are sort of just loosely connected to each other and there's no little, you know, cohesive subgroups or cohesive graphs, those networks tend to be have less affinity.
Okay.
And so, but to measure affinity, we have to include variables that are not going to be included in this analysis per se.
Okay. I just, and I'll take the liberty, Elisa here, of making sure that we invite participants if they have any further questions, especially regarding the math in the analysis, they shouldn't hesitate to contact us, and so that we could provide them with those technical details. Is that okay, Elisa?
I'm happy to. Happy to.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think the other aspect that we need to mention is that this social network analysis really is only our beginning study of the ecosystem of people who support primary teacher preparation in Morocco. There is a big focus on new research agendas in the HEP-M project, and we welcome people who are interested in exploring both this sort of mathematical social network analysis, but also social networks that may operate in different platforms, such as Facebook. That's not work that we can immediately kick off, but it is work that we can identify experts, particularly at Arizona State University, to support.
Perfect. And we have something like 14 minutes left. If you don't mind, I'll just go to another round of questions. Just make sure that I acknowledge as many questions as possible. This is another question from a colleague who thinks from like say from the standpoint of the classroom teacher, and his question is, what can social network analysis do to improve the professional situation, the actual professional situation of teachers at the primary level?
That's interesting. I mean, so this network analysis, if we're not specifically looking at the networks of the primary teachers, we won't answer that question with this study. If we are including primary teachers, we could see, for example, how well connected they are to other people with whom they trained, how well connected they are to their former instructors, whether or not they feel that they're getting the types of not just informational support that they need, but also in some sense emotional support. There's a lot of studies in the United States that are focused on within school teacher education or between school teacher, not teacher education, but teacher well-being, teacher communication, teacher continued training, those types of things, but also mentoring within schools, teacher support. So there's a huge tradition of social network analysis in schools. What's different, you know, in their school systems. What's different about this study is we're looking at the teacher trainers specifically. And that doesn't mean that the endpoint, which is the primary school teachers, are not important. But I think that that would be the scope, that's outscoped for this particular study. That's not the main focus. However, I think it is a very important focus. And it would also inform this study to some degree, because we also want to know how well the teachers, who are the endpoints, they're they're the boots on the ground, how they feel connected to each other for continued support, see how sustainable everything is, and also if there's still reach back to their trainers and to their old networks, their networks with whom they've trained.
Yeah. So there is another colleague who was wondering if the method of social network analysis is part of what he referred to as the methodology of social metrics, or the social measurement of Dr. Moreno.
Oh,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
good. So that's a yes.
Moreno is one of the founders of the discipline.
Excellent. Good point. So, colleague, you got the confirmation. Indeed, it's really heartening for both of the panelists, that they see that the questions are coming from colleagues who have a sense on understanding of what this approach is about, which is really boding well for us to be able to conduct a good study. And as you know, our entire activity or project is based on the full involvement of our colleagues in the research and development groups. So certainly, I think the fact that we're speaking the same language helps, and especially pushing our research agenda forward and making sure that we translate the research findings into practices that help promote coordination amongst the various players within the field of teacher development, especially the focus on primary. There are some other specific questions. One is more of a recommendation that acknowledges the fact that this is a new study, new terminology, and we should be careful about not confounding this study with what's done in terms of the social networks, like the social media, and it is not. And the professor is just suggesting that it should be called social network analysis in professional settings. There's a question: how are the functional links between nodes analyzed? How about cultural factors? And can I just let's say ask you two questions at the same time? So this one about how are the functional links between nodes are analyzed? How about cultural factors? And another one, how do you assess the level of density of communication in networks? Does that reflect a positive, let's say, positive communication?
Is versus negative communication?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you assess the level of density of networks? Like if the density is high, does that mean that communication is positive?
No, it doesn't necessarily mean it's positive. Because you could have a lot of people who are connected to each other and they could be they could hate each other. I mean, but so we look at what the relationship is. So it would have been interesting maybe to include some of the questions that we're going to have on the questionnaire, but we want to know who you go to for advice, or who you go to to do very specific elements of your job. And since that's the focus, the density would just be for your degree, how many people do you go to, or how many people do you talk to? If the people that you're talking to are the same people that other people are talking to, then that segment where there's a community of people who talk to each other a lot will have high density, but there might be less high density in other aspects of the network. So if the variance in density would show that there are some places where there's lots of communication and other places where there's less communication. We would also be able to track the ties. We'd be able to see maybe where there is, where there could be ties or connections, where we could facilitate connections to link two groups together so communication would start occurring between these two groups where currently there isn't any. So density is the primary way to measure it, but depending on what the relation is, it takes on different meanings. You can also, and I didn't say this, I talked about directional ties. Sometimes, like mentoring, for example, is a directional tie, but you can also have negative and positive feelings to each other. And you can also have signed graphs, or you can indicate a negative relationship or negative affect among various different people as well. And that's in the way that you code the data that you read. So depending on what questions you have, you can code it in several different ways. And with regard to affinities and the social elements, you look at the complementary data that you have on people, where they live, how, what their demography is, what kind of demographic characteristics they have, to see if there's any, patterns to who talks to whom, who excludes whom, who works well together, who tries to avoid each other. And so those things come out in the mixed analyses.
So I'm going to ask two more questions, and we will, and I think that should, and then maybe we'll just conclude, and that will bring us to the end of the hour. So this question is: in light of the networks that will be built, will training programs be established in the future to reconnect relationships in another form so that they are effective? And this is, I'm interested in this question because it reflects another question that was before, which said that if you want to measure relationships, at least you should bring people together first so that you measure relationships. So it looks like they are connected.
Edith, you want to pick this up?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this one. I think, again, the social network survey that we are doing really only highlights what the connections are. Using the patterns that are identified, particularly the gaps that are identified, will help this project and other activities in Morocco to understand who needs to be brought together in order to move this agenda forward. So I think that the work that we're doing is an important first step, but really understanding the ecosystem of people who are building this new program, this redesigned program in primary teacher preparation is going to be done by the people on the ground in Morocco, particularly among the institutions. But if you know someone in another institution who's, excuse me, and the SNA shows that they are connected to another person that you want to know, this allows you to think about how you might reach out to other people who are not part of your network and make them part of it.
Very good point. This is more more of a question about the paradigm. It says, thank you, Professor Elisa. Do you think that the theory on social dynamics in its traditional form is going away? And to what extent could we benefit from this theory in a context that is dominated by communication over social media?
So social media is new. Social network analysis started in the Moreno question indicates this. It started in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And it was in the 70s that it really came together. And it's built on solid social science theories. So social network analysis, not network science, but social network analysis is focused on the social. It's focused on all theories. It just makes explicit what the connections are. It's a way of formalizing and making empirical what before was just theoretical. And so much like statistics added value when you can do empirical work, the point of social network is just to say, well, we think that people are not communicating well here, but let's design some instruments to collect some information about what they're actually doing, and then analyze it and come up with ways of, determining what is good and what is bad. When you get hundreds of studies, with different empirical groups that indicate what measures matter. So this is the development of a way of quantifying evaluations of sort of interpersonal group dynamics at all levels, at the very small individual level, but any kind of relation that could be measured is amenable to the metrics. And in fact, the people who started doing research on social networks and social media use many of the metrics that were developed in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s as the basis for their analysis of these big, Facebook, Twitter, social media networks.
I'd like to finish by asking Edith. Please, Edith, could you speak to this question because it's very important. It looks like there is still some confusion about who the survey is intended for. Again, in your own words, who is the survey intended for?
So we are surveying to understand who are the people that are working to prepare and to support primary teachers. So the survey starts by going out to the faculty at the university and at the CRMF and at the ARAF. So we're starting with people in organizations whom we know have a major role in preparing teachers. We're also reaching out to some of the NGOs, the private organizations that support primary teachers. This is the first, we hope, of several social network analyses whereby we expand our outreach. The intent is not at this point to really reach out to teachers or to principals in the schools. That would be another study that we would love to do or love to support researchers in Morocco to do. But the focus right now is to really get at those who prepare primary teachers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Edith. This brings us to the end of the hour and the end of the webinar. Just like I promised, we are recording all the questions, and we're going to look at the other questions that we haven't had a chance to address. And we promise that we're going to address them one by one to make sure that all the information needed to conduct this study is provided as accurately and as transparently as possible. I would like to again thank the esteemed panelists, Elisa and Edith, for the really very informative presentation. I would also like to thank all the participants for showing up at such a big number, which is a very important testimony to how important this study and the entire activity of the Higher Education Partnership Morocco to all of us, and to just the quality of the questions that we've been receiving about the presentation. So thank you very much, and we look forward to continuing to communicate with you, and at the same time making sure that we share the presentations in both English and Arabic, and in their Arabic and English translations as well. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day.